Violence is the language of the oppressor. When we speak with our own words, they don't understand us. But it becomes a problem for them the moment we finally assimilate and start speaking in their native tongue. So, what's to be done, right? Every 3 months or so, a conversation pops up within milk leftist communities, and this is the same one that's been happening since the era of chattel slavery, okay? It's like over 300 years old at this point. And it's the same fear-mongering assumption that if given the opportunity, should black people ever seize power, they would immediately engage in an anti-white genocidal rage against anybody who even shares the same skin tone as their former oppressors. Now, not only is this take ahistorical and quite the opposite of material reality, not only is it entirely fueled by projection, the fear that we would do what their ancestors did to ours, but is fundamentally a conservative point at its core. It's designed to keep white people in opposition to the liberation movements of the oppressed and colonized people of the Western world. I speak on this quite a bit, but during the failed Reconstruction, the government did actually engage with reparations. They created the Freedmen's Bureau, which gave money and land to black people, and some of them did end up in positions of power. And what they did with this power was immediately work towards more civil liberties, like women's rights and public schools. And then this conversation reared its ugly head. And suddenly, public schools were burned to the ground, towns were destroyed, and tens of thousands of my ancestors were hanging from trees or floating down rivers. By the next administration, the Freedmen's Bureau was cut entirely. Governorships were given to ex-Confederates, and ex-slavers were reinstated as landowners. During this era, the only people who were entirely hostile to the plight of poor white folks were Confederates, rich people, and slavers. I don't know if you know this, but the Black Panthers fed white kids too. They're the reason we have school lunch programs. In fact, nearly every civil liberty and labor right that we take for granted today are almost entirely thanks to black activists that gave their lives for it. So we can examine history and know exactly what a liberation movement from an oppressed people would do with even a modicum of power. You can read the Black Reconstruction or a class struggle in the color line to know exactly what a black organization does once we have the ability to affect change in an oppressive system. Now, I've had talks with these supposed leftists, and they always had the same justification, that the abuse of power was simply human nature, and that white people just got lucky. And now keep in mind that nearly every human in our history has never had systemic power, much less the ability to abuse it. But this is one of the reasons why I say this take is fundamentally conservative at its core, because when you reduce the vast complexity of human sociology down to a single trait, you are effectively creating nearly every level 1 conservative argument. It's an exact copy-paste of the pro-capitalist argument, greed is human nature. The literal logical conclusion is to prevent the redistribution of power. And the idea that white people just got lucky, which I'm not paraphrasing by the way, those were the exact words. Interesting choice, and also an interesting take, considering that the global south, like Africa and South America, have vastly more natural resources than Europe does. They even had some hierarchical societies. And yet, global colonization did not originate from either of those continents. That's because abuse of power is not a base function of human sociology. No. It's a condition that was born out of the relationship between a tiny landmass and even tinier hierarchical societies, all competing for scarce resources, and the winners of those going on to reinforce this social phenomenon onto an international scale. These supposed leftists all shout, punch a fascist, and they have land back and BLM and free Palestine in their bio, but the minute that an oppressed demographic engages with revolutionary action, I guess it's right back to, if they get power, they're gonna hurt us the same way that we hurt them, based off nothing but the assumption that the oppressed would continue the same cycle of violence that the oppressor has instituted. And they wonder why marginalized people of today have misgivings with collaborating with them, when time and time again, they have sabotaged every civil and labor movement that our ancestors have fought and died for. Saying this while sitting on top of a pile of rights that our ancestors have fought and died for. It's amazing to me.
Welcome to Seen and Heard podcast, where everyone should be seen and heard. And my co-host Charles, welcome.
Hi. What happened? It's amazing. He says it's amazing to me, and does
Well,
it end?
yeah,
Was that
he
the?
basically ran out of time. So. Right.
Oh,
Yeah. So
yeah. So I don't disagree with his sentiments. He's specifically referring to white leftists, but I think it applies to almost all white people. He's singling out white leftists because he's saying otherwise they would be our natural allies, but even they make these assumptions, and it is basically true that I think the reason why nearly all whites in this country have a almost hysterical level of fear is they're afraid of the battle in Montgomery, but except completely across the board and not in retaliation, but just out of pure oppression. They're going to see a white person, they're just going to attack them in a big mob. That's what they think of as like mob violence. So yeah, it's unfortunate that the views are just remaining kind of in a place of delusion. And I could go on and on as well about discourses on human nature. So if you look at discussions of what human nature is, it's invariably, oh, humans are violent, humans are warlike, humans are homicidal, humans are racist, humans are, oh, it's greedy. It's just human nature. And firstly, that's been studied. It's never been demonstrated. Secondly, any trait that we say, oh, well, that's human nature, that people can agree on and can verify are invariably completely non-explanatory ones. Like, well, we both have 2 arms and 2 legs. Yeah, okay, fine. We're all humans. We have 2 arms, 2 legs. We have red blood. We have skin that covers our body. We have digestive enzymes. We're omnivorous. Okay, but that's not how you get from we have 2 arms and 2 legs to all humans are greedy. Again, it's not true. So be wary, basically, unless you want to go at length into that.
Yeah,
Be
elaborate,
wary of
elaborate.
any discourses on. Okay, yeah, be wary of any discourses on human nature is X. It's a way of being passive. It's a way of accepting the status quo. It's a way of rejecting change. And so, one of the topics I talk about is miserableism, right? So I've mentioned this in past podcasts, but it's a French surrealist concept, miserableism. It's the idea that it's an acknowledgement that things are fundamentally broken, but that there's ultimately nothing you can do about it, right? And this is what we battle in this podcast, is to get away from miserableism. So discourses on human nature is X is invariably a form of miserableism. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Humans are just violent. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Humans are just greedy. None of these have been demonstrated as true. Humans may be violent in terms of a certain kind of physical violence, but one thing we know for certain is humans are not homicidal. And this is what people ultimately mean. What they want to say is, well, you can't stop war. Humans love killing each other. No, it's untrue. When a human is forced to kill another human, 99% of them develop severe mental illness as a result of it. The ones that don't were already psychopaths, and so they don't notice any difference. They don't. It doesn't bother them that they had to kill people in battle. But everyone comes home from war with PTSD. It's because, sure, you could say all humans are violent. We like boxing. But you look at boxers, for example, every single boxer, before the match, I'm gonna put my fist through the back of his head. I'm gonna kill this guy. I'm gonna kill him. 100% of boxers that end up accidentally killing someone either end up committing suicide or retiring
Racial
and
terror
fall into a
gives
deep
PTSD.
depression. Huh?
Racial terror, like what the black people go through in this country, and then like Asia, any POC
Sure.
community.
Well, that, of course, victims. I'm talking about
Oh, okay, okay.
perpetrators. I'm talking about people who have to. The idea, of course, we know that victims of violence get PTSD. That goes without saying. But usually these discourses are about, well, humans are just violent. You can't stop war. Humans are always going to go to war. And it's absolutely untrue. Both historically is not true. And we also know from very specific evidence tracking that when a soldier returns from war, they do not talk about what happened to them. They talk about what they had to do. They talk about a time they had to kill a lady, or etc. They had to kill people to save them their lives or their unit's life, and that's what bothers them. So again, when a boxer, for example, accidentally kills someone in the ring, it really screws them up. They fall into a depression, they commit suicide, etc. The effects are very
That
disastrous. I'm talking about
that makes me
perpetrators.
think of the Nuremberg trials. Like I watched the Nuremberg trials, and the all of those
Okay.
Nazis that were on trial, they were so disconnected. And then, like what you were just saying, they were just like, I was just following orders. They were just trying to convince I was just
Right.
following orders.
Right. So what happened in that circumstance is the psychopaths rose to the top, right? So admittedly, most okay, so one thing that Hannah Arendt mentioned about the Nuremberg trials is she was so amazed at how incredibly common and basic these uber war criminals were. And I think what she didn't understand in terms of modern psychology at that time was, okay, they seem basic because the system selected for the 1% of humans that are sociopaths and psychopaths. So they turned out to just be very common people who simply don't have the ability to empathize with other people. But I need to make something very clear. The Nuremberg trials are a result of the Nazi genocidal
Mhm.
machine. But I need to talk to you about the history of how it developed. The reason why they went to the gas chambers is because in the beginning, when they first had the Einsatzgruppen, these were these SS units. The Waffen SS was not part of the German Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht was the German military, the German army, but the SS were the sort of ideological, the purely ideological Nazis. So the Wehrmacht was the army for the German Empire. The SS was the military wing of the Nazi party. Okay. And the Waffen SS, which just means the weapons SS, were the militarized SS units.
Mhm.
A lot of them were made up of conquered nations. So the Polish had an SS, the Dutch had an SS, the Norwegians, et cetera. Like conquered nations developed their own SS. The Ukraine, Russia, they had their own SS units that joined the German SS units, and they got the best weapons. So, and they were put into these things called Einsatzgruppen, who went around and physically shot, you know, tens of thousands of Jews. At one point, hundreds of thousands of Jews were executed. And this caused a very serious crisis because the German leadership quickly realized that even their most hardened radical units were getting really fucked up in the head, having to shoot women and children and bury them in holes. I mean, they were digging these huge mass graves and shooting them one after the other. And it was taking hours. And it was causing an incredible psychological toll. They had to make the system more automated and more abstract. You had to create more distance between the death and the killing, right?
Mhm.
So shooting someone in the back of the head in front of a big pit full of dead bodies is too intimate. It was causing, even with the most deranged members of our society, it was really screwing them up. So if you could create distance between the act and the deed, then and the result, then it was less taxing. And so that's where they started using Cyclone B. That was the gas that they used, right? Um,
Well, this is what worries me about what they're doing in the rush of the attack on academia here in the United States, and then the specific attack on Black people and their existence and their history, and then how now they've got PragerU, which is the curriculum that Ron DeSantis has for teaching, especially black kids. Black kids are going to these schools. They have like this whitewashed version, sanitized, super uber sanitized version of animated history.
it's not sanitized. It's deeply propaganda. It's disinformation. It's not just sanitized. It's rewritten.
Hmm.
It's a false PragerU might be one of the most dangerous institutions in the world right now. It's a far right wing, deranged kind of last gasp the um, of the status quo.
Hmm.
You know, people who are oppressed earned it. People who are at the top are deserving of it, and it's very disturbing. And the sad thing is that it their propaganda works very well,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, it's going to become the standard. And it's sad to think that we're going to cheat an entire. Uh, Using PragerU to talk about issues of race in America would be exactly like choosing a tobacco scientist to teach um, public health, nutritional health. You know, you're getting deliberate paid propagandists to dis and misinform. So the difference between misinformation and disinformation is misinformation is the system we have now. They don't tell you everything. It's not exactly correct. Disinformation is the deliberate
Right.
use of false narratives to mislead people for a specific propagandic uh, goal or end. So
And that
go ahead.
that is going that's killing the country actually right now. So like
Yeah.
this I just wanted to pull this up real quick because that was in the feed. White Americans have this epiphany, and then they realize anything done to address it will help black people, and then they don't care about it anymore. They will gladly die from whiteness, and that's what like what you're saying. They are it's the last gasp.
Yeah, and so and they're cheating themselves. I mean, like these kids who are homeschooled and they're not taught evolution. You know, you cannot understand one single area of biology, genetics, archaeology, paleontology. I mean, dozens of fields are forever lost to you if you cannot understand how evolution works, right? That would be like telling someone you're going to study astronomy, just don't ever use a telescope.
My thing is, so they're going to be isolated in Florida like this. First off, first question: Black parents, anybody that's listening to this podcast, you're a black parent, you got kids in school in Florida, specifically in Texas. Um, what is being done, or what are you guys going to do? And I understand everybody's got to work, and a lot of people have more than one job and everything like that. How do y'all feel? I'm just putting this question out there, and I like leave a comment, leave a voicemail on our voicemail. I honestly want to know what the black parents, especially, how y'all feel and what y'all plan to do about having your kids forced, with this propaganda, having to learn this propaganda about themselves and their history and their people. Like, honestly, if it were me, I'd be pulling my child out of school some kind of way,
Yeah, you'd have to. You'd have to homeschool them. And to quote sweet Brown D or whatever her name is, ain't nobody got time for that.
And also, all of those kids in the state of Florida are not going to be able to compete
They can't. They're
outside of
it's
Florida.
child abuse.
So none of
It's
those
child
schools
abuse.
should be accredited, right? Am I wrong
Right.
for thinking
That's
that?
correct. That they should lose. They need to lose their accreditation,
Mm.
and that's why we have accreditation to make sure that public education lives up to a certain standard, so that, for example, they don't not teach evolution,
Mm.
right? They need to teach the theory of gravity, the theory of relativity, the theory of plate tectonics, the theory of evolution, the theory of global warming. They need to be taught these things because it's the only explanation we have to describe everything we've observed through science. Everything.
On that, I'm going to play this video real quick because this is relevant to our conversation. But I want to play a video because, like, with them doing what they're doing, deliberately pushing this propaganda. Also, they're trying to teach people not to have empathy towards the soon to be more brutality against black people, specifically in the black community, because they're trying to desensitize people with these lies and say, oh, it's not that bad, it's not going to be the okay. No, It's not. Okay. I'm gonna I'm gonna play this video. Let's see. Here. Oh, wait. I had to I was looking for that guy's profile, and like I said, that his we'll play his video too before we go. But he his profile got shut down because racists got in their feelings, and they've been reporting people of color all over TikTok. But here it is right here. I found it.
So this Alabama brawl, to me, is a great example in the present day of Black deconstruction. Black deconstruction, not just from oppressive systems that told us that it is our responsibility to carry the weight of a nation that won't even acknowledge its past, let alone its present, and how it is needed our subjugation in order to continue on. Black deconstruction from this idea of turning the other cheek, when that cheek is constantly being lambasted by white folks who think they have every ability to take up space because somebody told them they were special, when in actuality, it is their ignorance that allows the perpetuation of the systems that we're in the present day. Deconstruction from this idea that somehow we can only be docile when we are met with violence, unprovoked violence for no other reason than us existing or doing the job that we are told that we're supposed to do, because law and order is always raining down upon us until these white folks need to actually have some law and order in the way in which they interact with themselves and everybody else in society. So as we're thinking about this Alabama brawl, and we have the memes, we have folks really engaging and talking about it being for the culture, I want us to understand this is a cultural reset. This is a resetting of what it means to actually allow your humanity to lead, and not an ideology that is telling you to put your humanity in the back burner in order to make it palatable for those who need our subjugation to continue on. So all I'm saying is this: know that when you throw hands at your oppressor who wants to throw their hands first, that is you actually showing up in your full humanity. That is you showing up with your motherfucking ancestors right behind you, who are also tired of the fact that we have been made and fed this lie that somehow it is our duty to comply. Compliance in a system meant to degrade you, compliance in a system meant to kill you, is not compliance, it is foolery, and we are no longer fools. So the Montgomery brawl to me is a prime example of Black deconstruction from the oppressive system that Christian white patriarch embedded within the foundations of this nation that keep us subjugated. So keep on throwing hands when they want to come throw hands at you.
I think your screen is frozen. Oh no, you're on the phone. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree with this, with this video completely. The first the first TikTok video, this one, it's amazing what great content is out there. It puts me to shame, because it's something I've been saying for years. I wish I could crystallize stuff into tiny little soundbite. I think I'm maybe just the wrong generation to
I don't think
have such
so.
nice
I don't
little
think so.
nice, neat little talking points. Well, then you can clip up my videos and put them on that TikTok. But yeah, I mean, but I agree with her completely. It's you got to understand that in the history of America, for 100% of its history, the type of thing that we saw at the docks in was it in
Montgomery.
Montgomery,
Yeah, and
or was it
Montgomery is
in
my
Mobile?
hometown too. Born and raised.
Okay, so in Montgomery, what we saw was unprecedented. I mean, you've got to understand, this is only something that could have happened in this generation. Maybe one earlier, but probably not, right? This is unprecedented. That for centuries, that situation would have ended up with a bunch of people hanging from trees.
Well,
We need to remember
it
that.
was historic in the sense also that first off, it happened in historic Montgomery, Alabama. That's like where my
Mm-hmm.
parents were part of the civil rights movement there. Martin Luther King spoke there. The dock itself was a slave port. That's where they bought and sold slaves. The right before the brawl, there was a Trump rally. So that is in the statistics as well, because everywhere Trump goes,
Interesting.
there's always something that happens after his rally. So nobody, the
That's right.
media has not mentioned that there was a Trump
That's
rally
interesting.
like an hour or so before the brawl.
What,
Also,
he was literally
he
there?
was there. There was a rally.
You
Also,
see, that goes to show you. I'm telling you, these
mhm,
crack. I'm
and
telling you,
also,
this is why. This is why it's important that. Okay, so when I was in graduate school, I was convinced. I'm sorry.
the,
Let me let you
oh,
finish.
I was gonna say there was a wedding party of black women, beautiful black women. They all did a ceremony at that dock, like an hour before the brawl. So basically, they were honoring the ancestors at that.
Yeah, look at the two different kinds of
Hmm.
energies.
And then that chair,
No, no, no. And don't just say. And don't. Yeah, and don't say that only the black women were honoring their ancestors. Those crackers were honoring their ancestors too.
and that chair, the metal chair, the
Uh
infamous
huh.
MVP, was
Uh huh.
invented by a
Invented by
black
a black
man.
man. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's why when I was in grad school, it was important that we talked about white supremacy. We did not talk about racism. Okay, racism is just one part of it. But in order to understand colonialism, empire, capitalism, okay, oppression, in order to understand racism, you have to understand white
Hmm.
supremacy. That's why you have people saying things like reverse discrimination, because they're not talking about white supremacy. When she's talking about Reconstruction, when he's talking about the history of Reconstruction, again, we have to understand white supremacy. When you showed that book about dying of their whiteness or whatever,
Hmm.
right? We have to understand white supremacy. Why is that important? You have to track first when they even invented whiteness. Now, that sounds strange to a lot of people, but it's important to remember that Europe used to be an ethnically diverse place, just like the rest of the world, especially for a place on the Mediterranean lake. I call it a lake, it, the communities around there were had exchange for thousands of years. Okay, so to think of any part of the Mediterranean as being as some sort of singular ethnicity is impossible, right? So you had Africans, you had black people throughout European history. If you look at English ministers, you had black English ministers centuries ago. Okay, you had certain families and clans in Greece that were black, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
Okay, so it, whiteness had to be invented, right? Which is why we saw that whiteness was used to be a Northern European Protestant thing. That's why Irish and Italians were not allowed. They were not included. Eventually, when in America, whiteness evolved to a degree that it then included both Irish and Italians to be included in
To
whiteness.
boost the numbers,
And that's how you see.
to
Hmm?
boost their numbers.
Right, and to create class antagonism, because it was important to realize that Irish and Italians had more in common with other poor white people and people of color, because they were ethnic, and they were oppressed, and so they saw a lot of solidarity with each other, and they were organizing, they were agitating, and it was important that they cleave part of that off to police it. So if you look at organized crime, so we think of organized crime as being the Italians and mafia. That's just a misunderstanding. Again, misinformation, not
Hmm.
disinformation, misinformation. The organized crime problem is an Irish
Hmm.
problem. Okay. The Italians took over the Irish gangs. You need to do your homework. If you see that Martin Scorsese movie, The Gangs of New
Hmm.
York, um, the early part of that movie is very historical. They show these firefighters who refuse to put out a fire because they haven't bought a fire badge, and that was true history. These fire brigades were these private Irish fire brigades that you had to buy. Every house and business had to buy their fire emblem, and if you didn't, they wouldn't put the fire out. They put the fire out at your neighbors who paid, but they wouldn't put out your fire.
Thank you for sharing that, because I actually like watching looking at like old buildings and old architecture and stuff like that. And I noticed I had no idea what that meant until you just told me.
Those
I had
shields.
no idea what that meant, because I've seen
And that's
buildings with those shields on them.
right. And that's how
Oh wow.
the earliest gangs got started, like the Bowery Boys,
Mm-hmm.
etc. They would compete with each other. So you'd have these brawls between these fire brigades because they were getting on each other's turf and selling their shield to businesses
I
and
had
stuff.
no
So
idea that's what
that's where
that
the
meant.
first organized crime started. It was then, when they were allowed to become white, that they became the
The
fire
police.
and the
Mm-hmm.
police. Okay. The police then started controlling the gangs. Then it's the Italians that moved in, the Sicilians,
Mm-hmm.
etc., took over the Irish organized crime,
And
etc.
then
So
now
that
it evolves to today, to what we see now. And on that note, I want to play one more video before we go, because this we hadn't even gotten into the conversation of forced assimilation and the damage that does to POC communities. So I'm going to play this video which talks about that. So hold on just a sec here.
Allow me to play a video for you and then discuss a comment on that video.
Sinasabi ko sa iyo, Ashley, huwag mo siya tignan ako, tignan mo! Ashley! Tignan mo ako!
So that video was the user Kelsifer reclaiming her pride in her Filipino heritage. A heritage that she was told by her white father that she would not need in Canada. In a comment on that video, this user, named Jenny, said this: "My foster kids are half Filipino, and he's right. It's honestly best to adjust to the normal. My kids don't even know that they are Asian."
Colonizer. Colonizer.
As someone who is fully Filipino and to this day still struggles to connect with his ethnic heritage due to societal racism, let me tell you why this comment is infuriating. This story starts from the perspective of my grandfather on my mother's side. He grew up in relative squalor around the 1940s Philippines. At this time, the Philippines was in fact a territory of the United States and did not in fact have its sovereignty. That being said, because there was a large US military presence in the Philippines, my grandfather did the most logical thing he could do to escape poverty. And that was to enlist with the United States Navy, wherein he would spend months at a time in a submarine underneath the sea. Fast forward to civilian life when he is married with 2 daughters, my mother and my aunt, and they are living in the 1950s to 1960s America. An America at which time was embattled with civil rights fights all across the country, notably in Selma, Alabama. You may have heard of men named Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, but I have digressed from the point. In order to protect my mother and my aunt from the societal racism perpetrated against black and brown people at the time, they did their best to whitewash my mother and my aunt. At dinner tables, while my grandmother and grandfather would eat Filipino cuisine, they would feed my mother and my aunt something more American, like cheeseburgers. The cumulative effects of these efforts to shield my mother and aunt from racism in the United States have resulted in the fact that neither my aunt nor my mother speak nor understand any of their native language. And as a consequence, neither do I. As a result of this cultural disconnect, I spent a lot of my youth vehemently rejecting my own culture. And it wasn't until I was already an adult that I started learning about the beautiful history of my own people. People that look like me. You might not be able to relate to how heartbreaking of a reality it is to not be able to connect with your ethnic heritage, but my culture was sacrificed for me decades before I was even an idea. That sacrifice was a choice made to protect my mother and aunt in the face of overt racism. Yours appears to be a choice intended to keep the legacy of that very racism intact. Your perception and understanding of what is normal is Eurocentric and gatekeepy. Your children deserve to know their ethnic heritage and be proud of it. Proud of it in the way that Kelsifer is proud of it. Proud of it in the way that I am learning to be proud of it. Anything shy of that is simply erasure. I implore you to reconsider the way you are treating your children's ethnic heritage, because diversity is what makes us great. And forced assimilation is, quite frankly, reprehensible. I hope you learned something. Thanks, and goodbye.
And we're watching that happen in real time right now.
Yeah. What do you mean in real time right now? What do you mean?
With like example Florida, the erasure, forced assimilation,
Oh,
forced
erasure.
learning, the
Yeah.
propaganda, whitewashing,
Mhm.
all of that, all of the above is like it's happening fast in real time.
So there's a so there's a couple things he brings up. So one of the dynamics, and again, one of the things I mention often is sociologists talk about this dynamic of push and pull, right? So you have a push towards the dominant, let me be normal, right? And then the pull back to my own authentic identity, right? My ethnicity, my foreign language, um, embracing the ways in which I look different, etc. Right? So we're all faced when we're other, right? And the other is a concept, a capitalized. Um, it's the other that was created in order to create whiteness. So we talked about how whiteness had to be invented when it came across sub-Saharan Africans, Black Africans. It was a shock to the system when they started colonizing the world. And so they had to construct what I am. And since they didn't know what they were, it had to be in opposition to that other.
Mm.
So the exotic other. So the most important books concerning this is, for example, Edward Said's Orientalism. I think everyone should read the introduction to that book. That should be required reading for all high school students. So, and then the other book is the introduction to oh god, culture, differences of culture. Um, Clifford Geertz. Okay, hold on. Clifford Geertz. What's his book? Definition of the interpretation of cultures. Okay, so the interpretation of cultures by Clifford Geertz. You can read the introduction, and that's where he dismantles this notion of human nature as being ultimately um, either so nebulous as to be meaningless, or it simply cannot achieve what we want it to by saying, "Oh, human nature is racist. Human nature is selfish. Human nature is greedy. Human
What was
nature
the
is
name of that book
warlike."
again?
Clifford Geertz, The Interpretation of Cultures. He died a couple of years ago. Edward Said sadly died several years ago now, prematurely. Edward Said is Christian Palestinian. Um, okay, so those are two of the basics in terms of understanding how the other is what allowed the white, the pure white, European, whatever, to be constructed as in opposition to the other. Okay. And by creating that identity, then that's what got named as normal or default or standard. So another thing that you should look up is Peggy McIntosh's list of of privileges. It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. It's about white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two versions of it that circulate, an abridged and an unabridged version. For years, I sent around the abridged version. And it was only later that I realized the unabridged version actually had some stuff in there that, unfortunately, at one point I thought were less important. But one of the things she talks about is I can walk into a beauty store and get my hair color and skin tone
Mm-hmm.
for any kind of makeup
Right,
product,
right.
you know. And I'm sorry, at one point I just thought, that sounds kind of bougie, and
But it's
like,
true,
what is that
yeah.
about?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how in in today's world, most of us realize now that is a major
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? I was like radical hippie. I was like, women shouldn't, why should women have to wear makeup anyway? Let us all just go natural,
Even little, even little things like
Huh?
dolls, because I remember being a kid, and my
Sure,
mom would.
that's
I
correct.
heard her when we believed in Santa Claus, but I remember as a kid, I'm out of the room, but I heard her being upset on the phone with her friend. She's like, I just don't understand it. She said, we finally got some their color. She's trying to talk low to her friend on the phone. We got some their color, and then all the white people go in there and buy up all the black baby dolls, and we want to get black baby dolls for our kids, but the
Wow.
white women are going in there buying up all the baby dolls for the black baby dolls for their kids, and they all have like white baby dolls for sale.
Right, they
So
already
I
have,
remember
yeah,
my
yeah.
mom saying that because she was really upset. Yeah.
Fascinating,
Little things
fascinating.
like that.
That's interesting. So, anyway, but going back to this lady's comment saying it's better that she just be normal, right? Why can't you just be normal? And it's the we talked about PragerU.
Hmm.
PragerU feeds off of normal, standard. Like, why can't you just be normal? Stop criticizing the system. There's nothing wrong with it, right? Leave things as it is. It's a good system. Quit complaining,
And it's
right?
normal by their standards.
Right. Okay. So it's important that you accept certain assumptions. For example, white is
Mm.
normal. It's standard,
Default.
right? It's default, right? Nobody notices, right? That's why when a person of color commits a crime or does something, they become a representative of everyone.
Muslims.
Never, ever, ever happens with a white person.
Right.
It can't even be imagined, right? So some of the more prominent examples these days is when a black kid commits some sort of a crime, they say, what happened with his
Right.
parents? And then when a white kid shoots up a school,
Mental illness.
it's never even
It's
thought of.
mental
No one,
illness.
no one, no one dares to think
Oh, he's having a
that's
bad
one fucked
day.
up
He
mom.
was having a
Yeah,
bad day. His girlfriend broke
he
up
has mental
with
health
him.
problems. You can't
He
blame him.
didn't get his favorite ice cream.
And you definitely don't blame the mom. Oh, how dare you? So, and yet, ironically, in this instance, I would say it has actually a lot. Now, if you grow up poor and oppressed and you end up with violent criminal behavior, I can kind of understand that. But if you grow up privileged, white, and then you develop this, there's something wrong with that family.
Mm.
And I call it the pathology of privilege,
Oh, that's
right? I
interesting.
say privilege breeds pathology,
Mhm.
right? Because it breeds a kind of unreality and detachment from the world. So it's this very disembodied, kind of surreal, kind of hallucinatory experience.
Yeah, because they're in a
right?
bubble. Because the richer you get, the
Yeah,
more
you're in this,
degenerate you are.
right, right. So you don't see the consequences of your actions. You don't see how the world is your oyster, really. Like, it's all there for you to just claim.
Extremely
It's already there for you,
sheltered
right?
and extremely protected by their.
Well, but the reason why I say it's privilege, I mean it's pathological, is because it creates a sense of entitlement, right? That's what PragerU feeds off of, that sense of entitlement. This was meant for you. You're hardworking, you're competent, you're intelligent. These people, in other words, the barbarians are at the gate. They're here to take your stuff. Right?
And it
They're
works.
here to take your job. They're here to take your money. They're here to fuck your women. You know, it feeds off these primal fears, and then once they take over, they're going to put you in camps and just and you know, turn you into chattel slaves, and they're going to put you onto reservations and starve you to death.
It's all
Just like that guy
projection.
said,
It's all
it's all
projection.
projection.
All
It's all
projection.
projection. Right.
Because
So,
they know that they're guilty. They don't want to be
and
held accountable.
that's what they call dog whistle,
They don't want
right?
to be held accountable for
Right.
it. And
The irony is, if they would have nothing to fear.
exactly.
And even on top of that, they still don't have anything to fear. That's the sad thing.
That
And
part.
it truly makes, and this is something I've said for years, that I've never understood. I've never been able to grasp. We like to talk about Malcolm X, Black Panthers, oh, look, Haiti, look, scary Black people. If you look at history, it's a marvel that Black people haven't been more militant. Any other group, every other group would be thousands of times more militant. No white person would ever let that happen to them. They would go to war to the last man to not be kidnapped, imprisoned, put into forced labor, have their children taken.
And on that note, that is why the Battle of Montgomery blew up in pop culture, because of what it represented. Just for what you just said.
It's finally standing up for yourself with dignity, and that's something that Black people have not been allowed to have. You were not default given dignity. That was not your space to claim. You had to suffer, your lot in life, right, and suffer it nobly, right. You had to be the noble savage. So, are you going to queue up that last video?
I was going to play this real quick right before the last
Go ahead.
video, but it's going to play perfect in here. So hold on just a second. Let me mute this.
Well, it appears that 2023 is the year of the find out. Baby and folks is finding out. Let's go.
So, I posted that Langston Hughes quote last week as well. It's something I've always marveled at. They, purely because of the goodwill, generosity, and graciousness of Black people, are they not what white people fear them to be? The angry Black man, the angry Black woman. There's these stereotypes. Oh, they're so angry. Again, A, it's projection. B, yeah, you're right. In my opinion, they should be angry. And C, you're fucking lucky they aren't.
All we ask for is equality and not revenge.
Right. Yeah, and that's what to me is alarming. When I look at American society, sometimes I feel like I'm a space alien, and I landed and I look and I just sit there and it's just like, they accuse Black people of being angry, but A, they're not. B, they should be. And C, they're fucking lucky they're not. What?
Right?
That's
why they work overtime.
I can't imagine if I were Black in this country, I might just go around randomly popping.
That's why they work overtime, pushing stereotypes, negative, harmful stereotypes.
I suppose it's sad, and the sad thing is people who perpetuate oppression themselves become isolated and lonely, and that's why their kids come out so screwed up. Because when you live a fundamental lie that does a deep psychic wound generationally, right? So as much as Black people have a lot of trauma in their communities and in their families because of oppression, the one thing they don't suffer from is a lack of the truth.
Right.
You tell your kids, just just brutal, raw, honest reality for what it is. You don't have the luxury. You cannot afford to be like, you could be anything you want, Junior. If you just put your mind to it, you could be president of the United States.
And
Right?
I was so lucky, like with my in my household with my kids, because they're biracial. I had a white husband 20 years, so we both. I was lucky that we both told them like the unfettered truth, the raw
Right.
unfettered truth, and he as well. He would
Hmm.
call out like his fellow Mayonnaisians and like they ain't worth crap, and you know what I'm saying. So it was like there was no lies,
You're going to have to work twice as
right?
hard, be twice as competent, and then be considered a affirmative action,
And we
beneficiary.
also
You know?
stress that you can't do what your other pale mates do. You cannot do what
Yeah.
you and get away with what your pale mates do. And
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
Kerry came in and he told him why, because he was a white guy that lived in, grew up in that culture. He would tell him why. Just tell him the truth. so so I am going to, before we close out, because we got one more clip, is Malcolm X. Well, before we close out, if you would like to, we also have a question. Almost forgot Aaron here. Aaron, I'm sorry, Aaron. Hi, Aaron, and joining me. Here is the question that Aaron wants us to ask from the show. Hold on.
Hello, this is Evie Tosh, listening in from Germany. Hello, Sharon. Hello, Chrissy. And hello, Chuck, the main podcasters here. Thank you. I have a question about the influence of today's politics on Black Americans in the United States of America, especially those of the Republican Party or the far right, DeSantis, Trump. The influences of these types of politics on Black Americans who have in the past as well have been thankful, so to speak, for slavery, um, because it gives them the ability to be Americans in this wonderful country they call America. So there's a lot of things I'd like to ask about that, but it's really disappointing. It's not surprising to me, but it is disappointing to see so many Black people or self-identified Black people, biracial people who are basically anti-Black. And this is not just a mere disagreements on whether BLM is making a great impact or not. It's just people who are basically just sharing the same sentiments of anti-Blackness or racism, basically from racist whites. So I would love to hear your thoughts about that, especially from Chuck, because I'm excited to hear how this started and what you guys think. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Aaron. And I can also say, Aaron, wo wohnst du eigentlich in Deutschland? Ich war Studierende in Deutschland. Ich war in Göttingen, in der Nähe von Hannover, which is ironically the university I attended was actually technically an English university because the guy King George, Georg August, he was from Hanover, but he was actually the king of England. So he created he gave two towns a choice. You can have one of you can have a university and one of you can have a jail. And the town of Celle was like, we don't want all those young college students by our young daughter, so we'll take the jail. So Göttingen got the university. So anyway, it's ironically it's an English university, but anyway, so um, in terms of like the origins, I'm not so sure. I mean, I think it's very simply um, how oppression looks, right? So first you have that dynamic I talked about, the push and pull, the pull back to my own identity, my own people, my own community, and the push towards the dominant. They say, which way is the see which way the wind blows. You're like, hey, I know which way the wind blows. I better get with them Europeans. All right, there, I could see many centuries of tremendous success for them. They're going to be fighting each other over the goods they're going to steal from us, right? So you look at the places that are colonized are the resource rich areas, right? So, for example, China was so resource rich that, in fact, the English literally had nothing they wanted aside from gold. And it created this huge trade imbalance. And that's why the British started manufacturing opium in India, in their colony of India, and exporting it to China. And they fought 2 wars over it. The Opium Wars are called collectively. As a result, Hong Kong, Macau, all came out of that, and lots of unfair treaties, etc. So, they had to literally fight wars to make sure that their drug dealing was allowed in China, because they could not create a product that the Chinese were interested in. They had everything. They had the technology. They had the resources. They had the silk. They had etc. So, and Africans were convinced Europeans were cannibals because they just kept buying people and they never came back. So a lot of Africans would, bite their tongues and commit suicide, jump off the boat and drown themselves because they were like, I'm not being eaten. Fuck that. And they were utterly terrified. So, so you've got that push and pull dynamic. The other dynamic, I think, to understand is what we call internalized oppression, right? So internalized oppression looks like, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, for most women, most women learned really negative things from their mother. Their mother was the one that was like, a girl is supposed to act this way. You're too fat. You need to get skinny. You need to go on a diet. A lot of the very sexist ideals, beauty ideals placed upon women is very often enforced through mothers. So likewise, for people of color, the gatekeepers who tell you what is or isn't acceptable versions of being an other, right? Oh, you can be kind of otherish, but don't use the language. And if you do, don't use it too loudly, or something. I hear this a lot. So I'm Korean, and our food is famously stinky. Today you don't have to be that ashamed of it anymore because it's become so incredibly popular, especially through LA and Hollywood. A lot of actors have made Korean food very popular. And so now people realize the stinkiness is a big part of its incredible rich flavor. And so people know that now, but growing up, it was always something you were very ashamed of. And my parents' generation to this day, they're like, it's okay to eat Korean food, but just don't eat too much of the stinky stuff. You don't want to offend people. Don't make them think that way about us. And that's why all Koreans have 2 refrigerators, one in the house and one in the garage for the stinky stuff. And I always resented that. I was like, who cares if it smells? Who are you trying to cover up for? So what? Our food stinks. You can deal with it because you're going to love it when you're eating it. So don't complain about how it smells. Those are probiotics. You know what I mean? It's going to prevent stomach cancer. Okay. So yeah, that internalized depression, we often, as I understand it, you might want to look this up, Sharon. I mentioned it to you before. Tom Bogle, Mammies, Bucks, Coons, the five tropes of Black America. Chris, 1004 Libra. Is that Chrissy with
That's
her
Chrissy.
blonde hair?
Yeah, that's Chrissy.
Look at Chrissy with her blonde hair. What's going on, Chrissy? Is that the right? Did I get the title
No.
right?
Oh, wait.
Tom
Wait.
Bogle.
Wait. No, because some Western animation.
Emmys,
Actually, we can have that pulled up for the next show because I want to look into that. But nothing but animation. Tom and Jerry.
I'm sorry, it's Donald Bogle,
Donald.
Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks.
Donald.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, that is 100% his argument. His thesis is 100% of all black stereotypes are in five and only five. And he talks about subtypes, like with the Tom. He says it can be an
Oh,
Uncle
okay. I
Remus.
know who that is.
So Tom, yeah. So Tom, it comes from Uncle Tom,
Hmm.
but you can also have a subtype like the Uncle Remus. Remember, zippity doo da, zippity yay. Remember how happy he was?
Okay, yeah. So
So
Donald Bogle, Black Beginnings,
right,
main argument.
right.
Okay, yeah, he used to be on. He's not on. They don't have him on TV anymore. He used to be on CNN a
Is that
lot.
right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, this guy right here. Yeah, he used to be like a
I didn't know that.
special commentator. And I,
I'd never seen him before, so okay, I didn't know what he looked like.
yeah. So he disappeared. Now that I see him, I'm just like, yeah, he hasn't been on.
Well, are you sure he's still alive? But okay.
Yeah. I could,
I mean that book's pretty old, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, 2001, I guess. Well,
mm.
really?
But yeah, so
Yeah.
and then in the same sense in like the black community, so because they do the same thing, internalize racism. Then we end up with people like Clarence Thomas and Candace
Candace Owen.
Owens, and you
So
know,
I posted a meme during the submarine time,
mhm.
right? Remember when the submarine, the
Oh
Titan,
yeah, 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 yeah,
disappeared?
yeah.
Somebody photoshopped the face of Candace Owen on the Little Mermaid swimming down. Candace Owen, when she hears five white billionaires are in trouble, swimming down to the. So that goes into the next video we're going to show
Right.
where
So
I've talked about Malcolm X's concept of the field
right.
Negro and the house Negro, and she's a house Negro. Like, ooh, is we in danger? Let me go save
Well,
you. I'll risk my life. And the newest version of that, as I understand it, is the Magic Negro. Do you know about the
the
Magic
magic.
Negro?
I'm
So the
seeing that
Magic
pop up.
Negro was introduced by Spike
Oh
Lee,
yeah, 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 yeah,
and
yeah.
that's a
Mm,
a very specific subtype of the coon, of the Uncle Tom
mhm,
character, where not only okay, so for a long time you had like the Legend of Bagger Vance, you had something, the Green
mhm,
Mile, you had all these magic Negroes who had literally magical powers, and they would never use it to get their own
mm,
liberation, but they'd always do it to help the white guy,
mm. Yep.
right? That's your classic Uncle Tom character. Okay. So that's kind of why, for example, like I wasn't that crazy about the Black Panther movie. I felt like, okay, if you're this highly powerful nation, how come you aren't fighting for Black liberation? And instead, you're trying to save the status quo along with other white superheroes. I don't know.
And on
Anyway,
that,
I just,
on the end of that, while everybody is celebrating this Montgomery brawl, we're all excited. Yes, we need to use that energy and put it into fighting fascism, like organizing, voting, getting registered, do whatever possible, like using your magic because we know we got it in us. You know, we saw it with the metal chair. So we need to seriously though, we need to try to channel that energy into fighting these people trying to put us back in chains. You know, if we're back in chains, we won't be able to use these metal chairs. But so on that, before I close out, if you like our show and you would like to support us, we have merch. I'm just gonna
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They sent some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. I'm a field Negro.